"You're not eating," he observed on the fifth morning, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. Ryan stared at the untouched breakfast Mr. Kim had delivered. The smell of food made her nauseous. "I'm not hungry." "That's not an option." His tone was matter of fact, the same voice he might use to discuss stock prices. "Your health is my investment now." She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the plate across the room, to shatter something as completely as he had shattered her. Instead, she picked up the fork with trembling fingers and forced herself to take a bite. The food tasted like cardboard, but she swallowed it down under his watchful gaze. "Good girl," he murmured, and the condescending praise made her stomach churn. That afternoon, while Jungkook was locked away in his study on a conference call, Ryan found herself standing at the panoramic window, staring down at the city far below. The view that had once seemed beautiful now felt like a taunt. All those people living their lives free to go wherever they wanted, to be with whom they chose, the contrast to her gilded prison was unbearable. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, imagining what it would be feeling like. "I like to break through it." I feel the wind rushing past her as she fell. The morbid thought should have horrified her, but instead it brought a strange sense of peace. At least then she would have chosen something for herself. The sound of Jungkook's voice, sharp and commanding, through his study door snapped her back to reality. He was discussing shipping routes with someone, his tone businesslike and good. The same voice that had whispered threats against her sister's life. The same voice that had called her mine, like she was a possession to be catalogued and stored. Something inside her snapped. The fog of despair that had settled over her for days suddenly lifted, replaced by a crystalline clarity born to pure. Desperate rage. She couldn't live like this. She couldn't exist as nothing more than a breathing doll in his collection. Her very breath dependent on his whims. Maybe she wouldn't save Sua, but she should, and she could save her own fate. Moving with sudden purpose, Ryan went to her room and changed into most practical clothes she could find: dark jeans, a fitted sweater, and sneakers. Her hands shook as she pulled her hair back into a ponytail, but her resolve was steel. She couldn't take anything that might slow her down. The bracelet caught a light as she moved, its beautiful surface mocking her with its preeminence. Jungkook's voice was still droning from his study. She had maybe 30 minutes before he would expect to see her again. 30 minutes to get as far as possible. The penthouse elevator required a keycard, but Ryan had been watching landing. Jungkook wasn't the only one who could play a game for observation. Kim used a service elevator for deliveries, one that accessed the parking garage directly. If she could make it there, her heart hammered as she slipped out of the main living area and down a corridor. She had never explored the service elevator, was exactly where she had hoped, tucked behind a door marked with Korean characters as she couldn't read. The call button glowed red when she pressed it, and for the terrifying moment she thought it might not work. Then she heard the mechanical whir of cables and pulleys. The elevator door opened with a soft ding that sounded deafening in the silence. Van stepped inside and pressed the button for the parking garage. The distant felt eternal. Each floor that passed was another step away from her cage, but also another step closer to potentially condemning her sister. The thought made her chest tighten, but she pushed it down. She had to try, she had to do something. The parking garage was a concrete cavern filled with luxury vehicles. Jungkook's collection was impressive: sleek sports cars and armored sedans. Even a motorcycle tucked in the corner, but Ryan wasn't looking for transportation she couldn't use. She was looking for the way out. The exit ramp curved upward towards street level, but it was blocked by an automated gate that would require either a remote or another keycard. However, there was a smaller pedestrian door marked with an emergency exit sign. Ryan's heart leaped. Emergency exits couldn't require special access. It would be a fire code violation. She pressed the release bar and the door opened with the harsh blare of an alarm. The sound was like a gunshot in the enclosed space, echoing off the concrete walls. Ryan didn't hesitate. She bolted through the door and found herself in a narrow alley behind the buildings. The afternoon sun was blinding bright after the artificial lighting of the garage. But she didn't stop to adjust. She ran. The alley connected to a main street, and she merged with the flow of pedestrians trying to blend in while her heart hammered against her ribs. Behind her, she could hear the distant wail of what might have been security alarms, but she didn't look back. She couldn't. She needed to get out of the city, away from Jungkook's network and influence. The train station seemed like her best option, but she had no money, no identification, nothing but the clothes on her back and the accursed bracelet. that marked her as his property. Panic began in and to set in as the reality of her situation crashed over her. She was in a foreign country with no resources, no contact, and with a man who unlimitedly endorsed power and reached hunting her. What had she been thinking? But even as doubt crept in, she kept moving. Movement was action, movement was choice. For the first time in days, she was choosing her own path, even if it led to destruction. The city began to thin as she walked, her feet carrying her away from the dense urban center towards the outskirts where buildings gave way to hills and forest. She had no plan beyond distance, putting as much space as possible between herself and the man who had claimed ownership of her soul. Hours passed. The sun began to descend towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Van's feet ached in her sneakers and her throat was dry with thirst, but she pressed on. The urban sprawl had given way entirely now to rolling hills, covered in dense forest. She had no idea where she was going. The signs along the infrequent roads were all in Korean, incomprehensible to her. But the forest called to her, dark, deep, and vast, enough to hide in. If she could lose herself in its depth, maybe she could disappear entirely, maybe she could become someone who had never existed, never been owned. The trees line beckoned just ahead, a wall of green that promised anonymity and escape. Ryan left the road without hesitation, plunging into the undergrowth. The forest was alive with sounds, rustling leaves, distant bird calls, and soft whispers of wind through branches. It was the first peace she had felt in weeks. No walls, no watching eyes, no suffocating control. Just the ancient, indifferent embrace of nature. She pushed deeper, following what might have been a deeper path through the trees. The canopy overhead grew thicker, filtering the dying sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. Time seemed to lose meaning in the green twilight. She walked until her legs shook with exhaustion, until her throat felt like sandpaper, until her vision began to blur at the edges. Only then did she stop collapsing against the trunk of a massive oak tree. The bark was rough against her back, real and solid in a way nothing had felt for weeks. She tilted her head back and stared up through the leaves at the darkening sky. She had done it. She had escaped. She realizes and shouldn't have but triumphed, but instead she felt only a hollow emptiness, because deep down she knew this freedom was temporary. Jungkook would find her, men like him always did, and when he did, the thought of Sua's terrified voice over the phone made Ryan's chest tighten with guilt. Her sister was trapped because of her escape. Every moment Ryan remained free was another moment of potential suffering for Sua. But she couldn't go back, not willingly, not to that suffocating cage of luxury and control. Darkness fell around her like a blanket. The forest sound changed, less bird songs, more mysterious rustling. That could be anything. Van tried to stand, thinking she could and she should find better shelter, but her legs wouldn't support her. The adrenaline that had carried her this far was finally fading, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion. She was lost, truly completely lost. She had no food, no water, no way to navigate back to the civilization. The forest that had seemed like salvation now felt like a vast, impersonal tomb. Her vision swam, black spots dancing at the edge. Dehydration and exhaustion were taking their toll, and she had tried to focus on breathing, on staying conscious, but the darkness was so seductive. It promised an end to fear, to pain, to the impossible choices that had brought her here. As consciousness slipped away, Ryan's last coherent thought was a prayer, not for rescue, but for her sister's safety. Whatever happened to her now, she hoped Sua would somehow find a way to survive in Jungkook's wrath. The forest settled into silence around her unconscious form, and in the distance, barely audible over the night sounds, came the mechanical whir of helicopter blades cutting through the air. The hunt had begun. Hours earlier, back at the penthouse, Jungkook ended his conference call and stepped out of his study, expecting to find Ryan in her usual position by the window, or curled in the sofa with a book she wasn't really reading. Instead, he found emptiness. Ryan. His voice carried through the penthouse but received no response. A cold dread began to build in his chest, not fear for her safety but worry at the possibility of disobedience. He checked their room first, then his own, then every corner of the penthouse. Nothing. Her clothes were still there, her few personal belongings untouched, but she was gone. The security alert from the parking garage had come through 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes during her surprise had been running free. 20 minutes of defiance that would require correction. He made 2 phone calls. The first was his security team. Every available man was to begin searching the city immediately. The second was to the villa in Bali. When Su'a terrified voice came through the speaker, Jungkook's own voice was ice. Your sister has made a very poor choice, he said without preamble. I want you to understand that whatever happens to you in next few hours is entirely her fault. The sound of Sua's sobs was almost as satisfying as the knowledge of that Ryan would eventually hear about them. Every moment of her freedom would be poisoned by the knowledge of what it was costing her life, her sister's life. By the time the helicopters were in the air, thermal imagining, scanning the forest outside the city, Jungkook was already planning her punishment. She had shown him her true spirit, her willingness to fight even hopeless battles. It was exactly the kind of fire that made breaking her so appealing. The real games could finally begin. Ryan drifted in and out of consciousness, caught between the cold reality of the forest floor and fever bright dreams that blurred memory with nightmare. In her delirium, she was back in the penthouse, but the walls were made of trees, and Jungkook's voice echoed from somewhere in the canopy above, calling her name with that same possessive certainty. The sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air filtered into her dreams, becoming the wings of some great predator circling overhead. She tried to burrow deep into the earth to become one of the forest floor, but her body was too weak to respond to her mind's desperate commands. A spotlight swept through the trees, harsh white light that turned the peaceful darkness into something alien and hostile. The beam passed over her once, twice, then locked onto her prone from with the finality of a snare closing around prey. Voices carried through the forest, sharp, urgent commands in Korean. The sound of boots on fallen leaves grew closer. Van tried to open her eyes to see what was coming for her, but her eyelids felt weighted with lead. Consciousness slipped away again, and she was grateful for the darkness. When she next surfaced, she was moving. Strong arms cradled her against a chest that smelled of sandalwood and expensive cologne, the scent that her body recognized even in its weakness state. She tried to struggle to pull away, but her limbs wouldn't obey. Jungkook's voice murmured against her ear, deceptively gentle. Don't fight. You're safe now. Safe, the word was a mockery. She had never been less safe in her life, but she lacked the strength to voice her protest. The helicopter's engine roared around them, and she felt the strange sensation of lifting off, of being carried away from her brief taste of freedom. She tried to speak, to ask about Su'a, but only a weak whimper escaped her lips. Jungkook's arms tightened around her, possessive even in her vulnerability. Sleep, he commanded, and despite every instinct screaming at her to resist, her body obeyed. Ryan woke in stages, awareness returning like a tide, slowly filling an empty pool. First came the softness beneath her, silk sheets and down pillows that her body had learned to associate with captivity, then the familiar scent of the penthouse, all leather and expensive air filtration, finally the weight of eyes watching her. She opened her eyes to find Jungkook sitting in a chair beside the bed, his posture relaxed but his gaze intense. He was wearing a simple black t-shirt and dark jeans, more casual than she had ever seen him, but somehow no less intimidating. If anything, the informal clothing made him seem more dangerous, less businessman, more predator. You're awake, he observed, his voice carefully neutral. Ryan tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Her head spun and her throat felt raw. A glass of water appeared in her field of vision, held by Jungkook's steady hand. Pride wailed with desperate thirst, and thirst won. She drank gratefully, though she hated herself for accepting even the small mercy from him. How long? She croaked when the glass was empty. 6 hours since we found you, 12 hours since you left. He set the glass on the nightstand with deliberate precision. The doctor said you were severely dehydrated and exhausted. Another few hours, and he didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air between them. Su'a, she whispered. The name turned from her throat. Jungkook's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Your sister is alive, somewhat less comfortable than she was yesterday, but alive. The casual cruelty of his words hit her like a physical blow. Ryan closed her eyes, feeling tears leak from beneath her lashes. Please, hurt me, punish me, but don't. Don't what? Jungkook interrupted, his voice taking on that deadly soft quality she had learned to fear. Don't make her pay for your choices. Don't hold her accountable for your defiance. He leaned forward close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. You ran from me, Ryan. You chose 12 hours of pointless freedom over your sister's well-being. Those consequences are yours to bear. He reached out and traced the line of her jaw with one finger, the touch gentle but somehow threatening. But I'm not unreasonable. I understand that your adjustment period requires certain allowances for emotional outbursts. This was your one mistake. There won't be a second. Ryan wanted to pull away from his touch, but her body was still too weak, and the bed left her nowhere to retreat. What did you do to her? Nothing permanent, he said, his thumb stroking over her lower lip. Yet, but my men in Bali have been given new instructions. The villa is no longer the paradise your sister was enjoying. It's became something much more educational. The implications made my stomach churn. She didn't know what I was doing, didn't she? Jungkook's voice was silk over steel. Didn't she know when she ran from a wedding that someone would have to take her place? Didn't she know when she spent those stolen millions that would be consequences? Your sister may be many things fine, but she's not stupid. She knew exactly what she was leaving behind. He stood up, moving to the window, his hand clasped behind his back. But let's discuss your education, shall we? 12 hours of freedom, what did it teach you? Ryan stared at his back, at the way the afternoon light caught the dark fabric of his shirt. She could lie, could tell him what he wanted to hear, but she sensed that he would see through any deception, and she was too tired, too beaten down for games, that there's no point and nowhere to run. She whispered, "Good. What else? That you'll always find me? Better." He turns back to face her. His dark eyes unreadable, and Van closed her eyes, feeling the last of her defiance crumble like sand. That fighting you only hurts her. Excellent. His voice carried a note of genuine satisfaction. I knew you were intelligent. It simply took the right motivation for you to apply that intelligence properly. He returned to his chair, settling back into it with the fluid grace of a predator who had successfully cornered his prey. There will be changes now. Your little adventure has shown me that the current arrangements are insufficient. A chill ran down Van's spine. What do you mean? I mean, my dear wife, that your cage is about to become considerably smaller. His smile was sharp and cold. No more afternoons alone, no more access to service elevators or emergency exits, no more opportunities for poor decision making. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. A moment later, the sound of the elevator reached them, followed by footsteps. Van turned her head to see a woman entering the bedroom. Tall, elegant, with steel grey hair pulled back in a severe bun, she looked like a governess from a Gothic novel, all sharp angles and disapproving lines. This is Mrs. Chen, Jungkook said, his tone conversational. She will be your companion. Think of her as a combination of caretaker and guardian. She has extensive experience in managing difficult charges. Mrs. Chen's eyes met Ryan's, and Ryan saw no sympathy there, only professional assessment. This woman had done this before, managed prisoners disguised as pets, broken wild things until they learned to be docile and docile. Mrs. Chen will be with you all the time. When I'm not present, Jungkook continued, she will ensure you eat properly, exercise appropriately, and make no further attempts at tourism. I understand, Ryan whispered through the words, felt like ash in her mouth. Do you? Jungkook's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity, but I wonder if you truly grasp the gravity of your situation. You're not a prisoner, Ryan. Prisoners have rights, prisoners have advocates, prisoners serve finite sentences. He stood and walked to the bed, sitting on its edge close enough to touch her. You're mine. Completely, permanently, irrevocably mine. The sooner you accept the reality, the easier your existence will become. Understand that? His hand found hers, fingers intervening with a tenderness that was somehow more terrifying than violence. Ryan, your sister's well-being depends entirely on your compliance. Her comfort depends on your happiness. Her very life depends on your complete and total submission to this new reality. He lifted their joint hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. The gesture should have been romantic. Instead, it felt like a brand turning into her skin. I don't want to be your enemy, Ryan, he murmured against her skin. I want to be your everything. Your world, your purpose, your obsession, just as you've become mine. The confession hung in the air between them, more chilling than any threat. This wasn't just about revenge or punishment anymore. Somewhere in the twisted games they had been playing, Jungkook had crossed a line from predator to something far more dangerous, a man obsessed. Rest now. he said, releasing her hand and standing. Tomorrow we begin your real education. Mrs. Chen will see your needs. He paused at the door, turning back with that cold smile that never reached his eyes. Oh, and Ryan, the bracelet you have been wearing has a tracking device, sophisticated enough to monitor your location, your heart rate, even in your sleep patterns. I have known every step you took today, every moment of panic, and every beat of your frightened heart. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. She had never been free, not even for those precious hours in the forest. It had all been an illusion, a game with rules only he knew. Sweet dreams, wife, he murmured, and then he was gone, leaving Van alone with her new guardian and the crushing weight of an absolute defeat. Mrs. Chen moved with quiet efficiency, checking the water glass, adjusting the pillows, her presence both comforting and oppressive. When she spoke, her voice was soft but carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Rest now, dear, she said, her accent faint but noticeable. Tomorrow will bring new lessons and you'll need your strength. As Van closed her eyes, she realized that her brief flight into the forest hadn't been an escape at all. It had been the closing of her last door. The final turn of her keys in her cage. She was truly trapped now, not just by walls and locks, but by the knowledge that every breath her sister took depended on her perfect submission. The forest had been her last taste of freedom, and she hadn't even known it, as it was already poisoned. The next morning arrived with the mechanical precision of well-oiled machines. Ryan woke to find Miss Chen already moving about the room, laying out clothes with the efficiency of someone who had done this countless times before. The older woman's presence was like a shadow, always there, always watching, but somehow unobstructive, until you remembered what she represented. Good morning, dear, Mrs. Chen said without looking up from her task. Her voice held the same professional warmth the nurse might use with a difficult patient. Mr. June has selected your outfit for today, something comfortable for your first lesson. Vine sat up slowly, her body still aching from yesterday's ordeal. The clothes laid out were simple but expensive. Soft grey leggings, a cream cashmere sweater, and a ballet flats. The kind of outfit that looked casual but probably cost more than most people made in a month. It was also, they noticed, completely impractical for running. What kind of lesson? Vine asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Mrs. Chen's smile was perfectly pleasant and completely empty. Mr. June will explain everything. First, you need to eat. You lost considerable weight yesterday, and he's quite concerned about your health. The reminder of her failed escape attempt stung, but Vine forced herself to not. Resistance, she had learned, only brought pain to others. She allowed Mrs. Chen to help her from bed, hating the way her legs still felt unsteady. Breakfast was waiting in the dining room, a spread that would have fed 4 people. Jungkook was already seated at the head of the table, impassively dressed in a dark suit despite the early hour. He looked up from his tablet as she entered, his eyes doing that familiar assessment that made her skin crawl. You look better, he observed, rising to pull out her chair. The gesture was perfectly courteous, but his hand lingered on her shoulder as she sat, a reminder of ownership. Thank you, she murmured, because what else she could say. He returned to his seat, watching as she picked at the food on her plate. Mrs. Chen will be accompanying us today. I thought it important for her to observe your first proper lesson. Vine's fork paused halfway to her mouth. What are we doing? Learning boundaries, he said simply. Yesterday's adventure showed me that you still don't fully understand your position. Today, we remedy that. After breakfast, they descended to a level of the building Vine had never seen before. The elevator required yet another key card, this one from Jungkook's personal collection. When the doors opened, she found herself in what looked like a private gymnasium, polished floors, mirrored walls, and equipment that seemed designed for both fitness and something else entirely. But it wasn't the exercise equipment that made her blood run cold. It was the other woman in the room. She was young, maybe 25, what kind of ethereal beauty that belonged in paintings. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulder, and she was dressed in an outfit similar to Vine's, expensive casual wear that somehow looked like a uniform. But it was her eyes that told her the real story. They held the same hollow compliance that Vine recognized from her own reflection. This is Myra, Jungkook said, his tone conversational. She's been with me for 3 years now, haven't you, darling? Myra's response was immediate, automatic. Yes, sir. Her voice was soft, musical, and completely devoid of personality. Vine felt sick. Jungkook, what is this? Education, he replied, moving to stand behind Myra. His hand settled on her shoulders and she didn't flinch, didn't react at all. Myra understands her place. She knows the consequences of disobedience, the reward of perfect compliance. Don't you, sweetheart? Yes, sir. Myra repeated, her tone exactly the same as before. Jungkook's hand stroked down Myra's arm in a gesture that should have been affectionate but felt clinical possessive. Myra had a sister too, once upon a time, a younger sister with dreams of becoming a doctor. Tell Mrs. June what happened to your sister, Myra. For the first time, something flickered in the young woman's eyes, not defiance, but a pain so deep it was like looking into an abyss. She's safe, so she graduated medical school. She has her own practice now. She's happy because, Jungkook prompted, because I learned to be what you needed me to be. The words were said with a flat precision of a memorized script, but Ryan caught the timber beneath them. The lesson was clear, devastating. In its simplicity, compliance brought reward, resistance brought consequences. And somewhere out there was another family, another sister, living free because the spoken woman had surrendered her soul. You see, Jungkook said, his attention turning back to Ryan. Myra understands that love sometimes requires sacrifice. Her sister is a successful doctor because Myra chose to be successful at being mine. Ryan stared at the other woman, seeing her own potential future reflected in those empty eyes. How long? She whispered. How long what? Jungkook asked, though his smile suggested he knew exactly what she meant. How long does it take to become that? Myra answered before he could. Some days I remember who I used to be. She said quietly, those are the hardest days, but they are getting fewer. The casual horror of the statement hit Ryan like a physical blow. This wasn't just imprisonment, this was systematic erasure of self. The slow dissolution of identity until nothing remained but the shape he wanted. Myra will be helping you with your lessons, Jungkook continued, as if they were discussing something mundane as cooking classes. She'll teach you the proper responses, the expect behavior. Think of her as your guide. He moved away from Myra, approaching Ryan with that predatory grace she had learned to fear. The process doesn't have to be unpleasant. Myra's early days were difficult because she thought and fought the inevitable. But you're smart than that, aren't you? Ryan's throat felt dry as sand. And if I refuse? The question seemed to amuse him. Refuse what? To learn proper behavior? To accept your place? To stop causing unnecessary suffering to the people you claim to love? He tilted his head, studying her face. You can't refuse reality, Ryan. You can only choose how to be painfully accepting it will be. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her voice professionally gentle. The lesson aren't meant to be cruel, dear. They are meant to be helpful. You find peace in your life. Fighting only brings pain to you and to others. Peace, Ryan repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. Yes, Jungkook said, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek. The peace that comes from no longer struggling against the current. The peace that comes from surrender. His thumb strokes across her skin, and she forced herself not to flinch away. Your sister is currently in a concrete cell in the basement of that villa. No windows, no comforts, no contact with the outside world. She'll remain there until you show me that you understand what compliance looks like. The image he painted made Ryan's knees weak. Please, I'll do whatever you want, just whatever I want, he interrupted, his voice sharpening with interest. Are you certain about that? The trap in his words was obvious, but she had no choice but to walk into it. Yes, then kiss me. The command hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Not a kiss forced on her head, but one she would have to choose to give. The difference was crucial. It would be her surrender, her active participation in her own subjection. Ryan glanced at Myra, whose face had gone completely blank again, and at Mrs. Chen, who watched with professional interest. There was nowhere to run, no one to help, no choice that didn't end in someone else's suffering. She stepped closer to Jungkook, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his eyes, the way his lips curved with anticipation, close enough to smell his cologne and feel the heat radiating his body. I hate you, she whispered so quietly only he could hear that. I know, he replied, his voice equally soft, but you'll kiss me anyway. And she did. It was nothing like the villain flaming after the restaurant or possessive plant he had burned into her lips the night he had revealed the truth. This was worse because it has her choice. Her lips. The night he had revealed the truth, this was worse because it was her choice. Her lips moved against his with careful precision, giving him exactly what he had demanded while trying to keep her soul separate from the action. But Jungkook was too skilled, too experienced in the art of psychological manipulation. His hand came up to frame her face, deepening the kiss until it became something that felt almost tender, almost real, until her treacherous body began to respond despite her mind's desperate protest. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were blazing with triumph and something darker, satisfaction at his having made her complicit in her own destruction. Very good, he murmured, his thumb tracing her lower lip. You're learning. Behind them, Myra spoke in that flat, emotionless tone. It gets easier eventually. You won't remember why you hated it. The promise was meant to be comforting, but it filled Ryan with a horror so complete she nearly collapsed, because she could see it already. The slow erosion of her resistance, the gradual acceptance of the unexpectable, the day when she would kiss him and mean it. Phase 1 is complete, Jungkook announced, stepping back. Mrs. Chen, please escort Ryan back to the penthouse. She has had enough education for one day. As they moved towards the elevator, Ryan caught one last glimpse of Myra, standing perfectly still in the center of the room like a beautiful broken doll waiting for the next command. In 3 years, that would be her. In 3 years, she would be the one teaching some other terrified woman how to surrender her soul piece by piece. The elevator doors closed, cutting off the view, but the image burned behind Ryan's ear, her future mapped out in perfect, horrifying detail, and somewhere in Valley, her sister sat in darkness, her fate tied to how quickly Ryan could learn to become a ghost of herself. The lesson had been received, absorbed, internalized. Tomorrow would bring new lesson, each one designed to chip away another piece of who she used to be. The breaking had begun in earnest. 3 weeks passed in a haze of carefully orchestrated conditioning. Ryan's days had taken on a rigid structure under Mrs. Chen's watchful eyes. Morning exercises, afternoon etiquettes, lesson with Myra, evening dinners with the practiced. The art of perfection compliance. Each day she felt another piece of herself slip away, fell down and reshaped to fit Jungkook's vision of what she should be. The bracelet on her wrist had become less noticeable, its weight as familiar as her own heartbeat. She had stopped testing its limits, stopped even thinking about the tracking device that monitored her every movement. What was the point? There was nowhere to run, no one to run to, and every act of defense only brought more suffering to Soo-ah. Jungkook seemed pleased with her progress. His touch had become more frequent, a hand on her shoulder during meals, fingers brushing hers when he handed her things, casual displays of ownership that she no longer flinched away from. The compliance he had demanded was becoming automatic, a protective shell that kept her functioning while something deeper inside her slowly died. It was on Thursday evening during one of their silent dinners that everything changed. The elevator doors opened with the familiar whisper, but instead of Kim, with the evening service, a woman stepped out. She was stunning in a way that money and obsession could make someone perfectly sculptured features, designer, everything, and an aura of barely contained energy that set Ryan nerves on edge immediately. Appa, the woman called out, her voice bright with manufactured joy. Surprise! Jungkook looked up from the meal, and for the first time since Ryan had known him, she saw genuine surprise across his feature. It was quickly replaced by something colder, more controlled, but the damage was done. Someone had managed to catch him off guard. Yuna, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I wasn't expecting you. The woman Yuna glided into the dining room as if she owned the place. She was younger than Ryan had first thought, maybe early 20s, with the kind of confidence beauty that came from never being told no. Her eyes swept over the dinner scene, lingering on Ryan with barely concealed disdain. I was in Seoul for a photo shoot, Yuna said, settling herself into the chair across from Ryan without invitation. I thought I'd come see how married life is treating you. Her smile was perfectly white and absolute predatory. Ryan felt like a small animal that had just been spotted by a larger predator. Yuna is a model, Jungkook explained to Ryan, though his tone suggested the introduction was more obligation than curiosity. We have known each other for years and years, Yuna agreed, her fingers trailing across the table towards Jungkook's hand since before this arrangement of yours. The way she said arrangement made it clear exactly what she thought of Ryan's presence. Jungkook didn't take her hand, but he didn't move away from her touch either, and Ryan felt something twist in her stomach that she didn't want to examine too closely. And you must be the famous replacement bride. Yuna continued, her attention turning to Ryan with a laser focus. I have to say, I can see why Soo-ah. If I were her, I wouldn't want to be tied down to domestic bliss either. The casual cruelty of the comment hit its mark. Ryan's hand tightened on her fork, but it kept her expression neutral. 3 weeks of conditioning had taught her not to react, not to give anyone ammunition to use against her. How did you get up here? Jungkook asked, and there was an edge to his voice that Ryan had learned to recognize as dangerous. Yuna's love was like broken glass, beautiful and sharp enough to cut. Oh, please. You know I have my ways. Beside your security team knows me. You're not going to keep me away from you. She leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hands finally making contact with Jungkook's wrist. I've missed you, Paul. Really missed you. The whole marriage thing is just business, right? It doesn't have a change what we had. Ryan felt something could settle in her chest. She looked at Jungkook, waiting for him to correct Yona's assumption, to assert his ownership the way he did with everyone else, but he didn't. He just looked at Yona with that unreadable expression that could mean anything. What we had, he said finally. It was a long time ago, was it? Yona's voice dropped to a purr. Because I remember it differently, I remember you saying I was the only woman who understood your particular needs. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Ryan wanted to look away to excuse herself, pretend she wasn't witnessing this intimate exchange, but Mrs. Chen's lesson had been thorough. She was to remain exactly where Jungkook placed her unless explicitly dismissed. That was before. Jungkook said, but his voice lacked its usual certainty. Before what? Before you decided to play house with someone else left of her? Yona's eyes flicked to Ryan with open contempt. Come on, Opa, look at her. She's terrified of her own shadow. Is that really what you want? Someone who submits because she has to, not because she wants to? Ryan felt heart raise in her cheeks, humiliation and anger warring in her chest. The casual dismissal, the reduction of the entire existence to leftovers. It was designed to hurt, and it succeeded. At least I know my place, Ryan said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Yuna's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose, and Jungkook's attention snapped to Ryan with leisure intensity. Excuse me? Yuna's voice was still wrapped around steel. Ryan knew she should apologize, should retreat into the submissive shell that had kept her safe for weeks. But something about this woman's casual cruelty, her assumptions that should waltz in and reclaim territory that wasn't hers, sparked a defiance Ryan thought had been completely extinguished. I said, I know my place, Ryan repeated, meeting Yuna's gaze directly. I don't need to break into places where I'm not invited. The silence was followed by deafening. Yuna's face went through several expressions, shock, fury, and something that looked almost like excitement, as if Ryan had just provided her with exactly the entertainment she had been looking for. Oh, Yuna said softly, a smile spreading across her lips that had nothing to do with humor. You have some fight in you after all? How interesting. She turned to Jungkook, her hand still resting on his wrist. I like her, Oppa. She's got more spirit than I expected. I think I'm going to enjoy getting to know her better. The promise in her words made Ryan's blood run cold. This wasn't over, this was just the beginning. Jungkook finally spoke, his voice carefully controlled. Yuna, you should go. Should I? She tilted her head, studying his face. But I just got there. And you little wife just issued me such an interesting challenge. It would be rude not to accept it. She stood up with fluid grace, moving around the table until she was standing directly behind Ryan's chair. Her hand settled on Ryan's shoulder, just a grip tight enough to be uncomfortable. You know, she murmured, her breath warm against Ryan's ear. Oppa used to tell me everything, all his business dealings, all his personal interest. We were very close, weren't we, Oppa? Ryan could feel the tension radiating from Jungkook, could see the way his jaw tightened, but he didn't tell Yuna to stop touching her, didn't assert the possessive claim that had become so automatic with everyone else. I know all about your sister. Yuna continued, her voice a whisper meant only for Ryan. About the villa in Bali, about the choices you've made to keep her safe. Such devotion, such sacrifices, I almost admire it. Her nails stuck slightly into Ryan's shoulder, but I wonder how devoted you would be and would you be if the stakes were raised? If keeping your sister safe meant sharing what you think belongs to you? Yuna, Jungkook's voice cut through the room like a blade. Enough. But Yuna was laughing, her hand finally releasing Ryan's shoulder. Of course, Oppa, I wouldn't want to overstay my welcome on my first visit. The emphasis on first was unmistakable. This wasn't a one-time instruction or intrusion. This was a declaration of war. I'll be in Seoul for a few weeks, she announced, moving back towards Jungkook. For work, of course, but I do hope we'll see each other more often. All of us. She leaned down and pressed a kiss to Jungkook's cheek. her lips lingering just long enough to make her point. Give me regards to Sua, won't you? I hope she's comfortable. And then she was gone, gliding out of the penthouse as suddenly she had arrived, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and the lingering threat of chows to come. The silence that followed her departure was thick and suffocating. Ryan stared at her plate, her appetite completely gone, while Jungkook sat frozen in his chair. Finally he spoke. That was unwise. Ryan looked up to find his dark eyes fixed on her face. What was? Provoking her. Yuna isn't someone you want as an enemy. And what is she to you? The question slipped out before Ryan could stop it. 3 weeks of conditioning momentarily forgotten in the face of genuine curiosity and something that felt disturbingly like jealousy. Jungkook's expression shuddered completely. Someone from my past, someone who should have stayed there. He stood up. His dinner forgotten, Mrs. Chen will escort you to your room. You're not to leave the penthouse under any circumstances until I say otherwise. Jungkook. No, his voice broke. No arguments. Yuna's interest in you is problematic until I can assess the situation. You're to stay exactly where I can protect you. Protect the word have been comforting, but something in his tone suggested the protection was more about possession than genuine care. Ryan was his property and Yuna represented a threat to that ownership. As Mrs. Chen appeared to escort her way out, Ryan caught the last glimpse of Jungkook standing alone in the dining room, his hand clenched at his side, staring at the chair where Yuna had sat. For the first time since her capture, Ryan realized that Jungkook might not be as completely in control as she had thought, and somehow that possibility was more terrifying than his absolute dominance and ever been. Because if Jungkook wasn't in control, if someone like Yuna could make his foundation of his carefully constructed world, then Ryan's dinner's safety and Sua's life might be more fragile than she had ever imagined. The game was changing again, and this time Ryan wasn't even sure whose side she was supposed to be.